"They're going to kill us," said the two Chinese girls. But his reply made their hearts stop cold. Two young Chinese girls, May and Lin, were traveling far from home. They had been excited about this journey for weeks. Their parents had warned them to stay careful, but nothing could prepare them for the feeling of being completely alone in a strange town. The town was small, with narrow streets and houses that looked old and abandoned. The sun was setting and shadows stretched across the walls, making every corner seem darker than it actually was. May looked at Lin with nervous eyes. "Something doesn't feel right," she whispered. Lin nodded silently, her fingers gripping her backpack straps tightly. The girls had been walking for a while, trying to find a small inn where they could spend the night, but every street looked the same. The farther they walked, the more uneasy they felt. It started subtly at first. May noticed a figure across the street just standing there and watching. She froze for a moment, unsure if it was real or her imagination. She nudged Lin gently. "Look," she whispered. Lin turned and her eyes widened. There was definitely someone watching them. The figure did not move, just stayed in the shadow of the building, blending into the dim light. The girls quickened their pace, glancing nervously behind them. Each time they turned, they thought they saw more figures lurking just out of sight. Fear began to rise in their chests like a heavy weight, and their breaths became shorter. Every sound, the clattering of a loose shutter, a distant dog barking, felt magnified. Their hearts pounded as the sense of danger grew stronger with every step. They tried to think calmly. "Maybe we're just imagining things," Lin said, trying to sound brave, but even she did not believe her own words. The town was quiet, too quiet. The few people they saw gave them strange looks but did not speak. It felt as if everyone knew something they didn't. May stopped suddenly and grabbed Lin's hand. "Lin, I think they're following us," she whispered. Lin's eyes filled with fear. They looked back and saw two men walking several steps behind, keeping pace with them. Their faces were shadowed, and they wore dark clothes that blended with the evening. Panic began to rise. May whispered again, barely moving her lips. "They're going to kill us." The words hung in the air, heavier than the fading sunlight. Lin's hands trembled. The girls turned into a smaller street, hoping to lose the men among the narrow alleys, but the strangers followed without hesitation. Every corner they turned seemed to bring them closer to the men rather than away. May felt tears prick her eyes. "What should we do?" she asked softly. Lin shook her head. "I don't know, maybe we should run," but running seemed dangerous. The town was unfamiliar, and every shadow could hide another threat. They moved faster, careful not to stumble, but their fear was growing faster than their steps. Every sound, every movement around them made their hearts race. The world felt unreal, like they were trapped in a nightmare where every decision could lead to harm. Then out of the corner of their eyes, they saw a figure step out from the shadows. It was a man standing calmly in the middle of the street, as if he had been waiting for them. He did not appear threatening. His face was calm, almost serene, and his eyes held a steady focus. May stopped in surprise. Lin hesitated, unsure what to do. The stranger's presence was unexpected, and for a moment they forgot about the men following them. The girls exchanged a glance. Could he be a local? Was he a friend or a threat? Fear and uncertainty battled with a faint glimmer of hope. The man did not move closer. Instead, he raised his hands slightly in a peaceful gesture. "Are you two all right?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. There was no rush, no panic in his tone, just calm. May found her voice first. We are being followed," she said quickly. "Two men, they're after us, we don't know why." Her words tumbled out, rushed and shaky. Lin added, "Please, can you help us?" The man nodded slowly, listening carefully. His eyes were focused, but there was no sign of fear or judgment. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he said. His voice carried a quiet authority that made the girls feel as if speaking aloud might bring clarity and control to the situation. May and Lin began recounting their story, describing every suspicious encounter, every glance that had felt threatening, and every moment they had felt trapped. The more they spoke, the more they realized how frightened they had been. Speaking to someone who actually listened began to ease their tension, even slightly. The man, whose name they later learned was Mr. Zhang, asked questions calmly, each one precise and deliberate. He asked what the men looked like, where they had been seen, and whether the girls had encountered anyone who had been friendly or threatening before. He made notes in his mind but never interrupted. He simply listened and nodded when appropriate. May and Lin were amazed by his calmness. It was strange to see someone so composed while their hearts were racing and fear threatened to take over their minds. The girls had never met anyone who could remain so steady in the presence of danger. Mr. Zhang's composure was like a shield, providing a small, safe space in the middle of the chaos. After listening to their story, Mr. Zhang spoke in a soft, deliberate voice. "Fear can make danger feel bigger than it is," he said. "But panic can also make you weak." His words made the girls stop and consider. May's hands were still trembling, but she felt a flicker of hope. Lin's breathing began to slow slightly. "What do you mean?" Lin asked. "Mr. Zhang explained that people who feel fear often make mistakes that others can use against them. But if they stayed calm and moved carefully, they could regain some control over the situation. "You have to face what is in front of you, not run blindly," he said. "That is the first step to staying safe." The girls listened intently. It was unlike anything they had been told before. No one had ever explained danger in a way that didn't make them panic more. Mr. Zhang's calmness was teaching them a new way to think, a way to survive by being aware rather than afraid. As night fell completely, the town seemed darker than ever. The shadows grew longer and the wind whispered through the narrow streets. May and Lin stayed close together, their hands intertwined, but they felt the first sense of guidance they had experienced since the danger began. Mr. Zhang did not try to lead them elsewhere yet. Instead, he stayed close, offering advice on how to move, where to walk, and how to be aware of their surroundings. He showed them small gestures, ways to appear confident without provoking danger. Every detail mattered. He reminded them to keep their heads up, to make their steps firm, and to speak only when necessary. The girls realized that even small changes in their behavior could make a difference. For the first time, fear felt manageable. There was still danger, but it seemed like something they might control, not something that controlled them. Hours passed, and the girls remained close to Mr. Zhang. They moved through streets that had seemed threatening at first but now felt navigable with guidance. May whispered softly, I think he really can help us." Lin nodded, her eyes reflecting the faint light of street lamps. "I feel safer," she admitted. It was strange to feel safer with someone they had only just met, but Mr. Zhang's presence, his calm voice, and his focused attention created a sense of security they had not felt anywhere else. The girls began to understand that courage was not about being fearless. It was about staying calm and aware, even when everything around you suggested danger. They clung to this lesson, repeating it silently as they moved through the night. Eventually, the first signs of safety appeared. They reached a small square where a few late-night shopkeepers were still awake. Mr. Zhang suggested they stay in the lighted area where others could see them if anything went wrong. The girls followed his advice without hesitation. For the first time that night, they felt the tension ease slightly. The shadows were still there, but the feeling of being hunted had lessened. May and Lin exchanged a glance, sharing a silent gratitude for the stranger who had appeared at the exact right moment. They did not yet know what would happen next, but they felt a renewed sense of control over their own actions. Fear had not vanished, but with Mr. Zhang by their side, it had become manageable. As the night wore on, the girls reflected quietly on everything that had happened. They realized how easily panic could have led them into serious danger. They also understood that help could come from unexpected places, and that courage could be quiet, patient, and calm, rather than loud or forceful. With Mr. Zhang guiding them, May and Lin began to see a path forward. They were still in danger, but they had learned that facing fear with awareness was the first step to survival. The lesson would stay with them, shaping the way they approached the rest of their journey. By the time they found a small inn to rest for the night, May and Lin's hearts were still racing, but not from panic alone. They felt the first relief of hope in hours. They had survived the initial threat, learned to listen and trust someone who understood, and discovered a new sense of courage they had never imagined. The night was far from over, but they now had the first tools to face whatever came next. The night was quiet, but May and Lin could not fully relax. Even inside the small inn, the memory of the men following them kept their hearts pounding. The rooms were simple, with plain beds and a small wooden table, but the girls hardly noticed the comfort. Their eyes constantly flicked to the window, imagining shadows moving outside. May sat on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees, while Lin paced the small space. "I can't stop thinking about them," May said softly. Lin stopped and looked at her friend. Me neither. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. Both girls shivered. The fear from earlier was still alive, though slightly less sharp than when they had been outside. The memory of Mr. Zhang's calm presence was the only thing that kept panic from overwhelming them completely. Mr. Zhang stayed with them for a while, sitting quietly in the corner of the room. He did not try to command them or tell them what to do next immediately. Instead, he listened to their recounting of the events, encouraging them to speak openly. "Talk about everything you remember," he said gently. May described the first time she noticed the men, the way they followed her and Lin without showing emotion. Lin added details about the small gestures the men made, watching from behind corners, appearing suddenly when the girls tried to change direction, and asking strange questions earlier in the day. Each detail they shared made the girls feel lighter, as if speaking aloud gave the fear less control over their minds. Mr. Zhang nodded thoughtfully, occasionally asking questions to clarify details, but never showing shock or judgment. His calm reaction helped them feel that the danger could be managed, even if it was still real. Once they finished talking, Mr. Zhang began to explain why remaining calm was important. "Fear is natural," he said. "It protects us, but it also makes our minds scatter. Panic is dangerous because it gives power to those who intend harm. You must focus. You must be aware. You must move with purpose." The girls listened carefully. They realized that in their panic earlier, they had made choices based purely on fear, running from shadows instead of thinking clearly. Mr. Zhang continued, "Control your actions, control your steps, control your voice. That is how you take away power from those who want to scare you." His words were simple, but the meaning was deep. May and Lin began to repeat his advice silently to themselves, as if learning a mantra that could protect them. After a short pause, Mr. Zhang stood up and walked to the window. He looked outside, scanning the streets with sharp eyes. "We need to think about what to do next," he said. "They are still out there. You cannot stay hidden forever." May's stomach tightened. She realized he was right. The girls could not stay locked in a room, hoping the danger would disappear. Lin's hands shook slightly as she considered the idea of leaving the inn and walking back into the streets. Mr. Zhang noticed her hesitation. "I know it feels frightening," he said. "But sometimes fear grows bigger than the danger itself. If you wait, you lose control. We need to plan carefully, calmly, and act when the time is right." May and Lin nodded, trusting his words. His calm authority made the idea of leaving seem possible, though still terrifying. Mr. Zhang explained a strategy. "The first step is to stay visible. Hiding can sometimes make people more aggressive if they believe you are running from them. Show that you are aware, confident, and prepared. The second step is to have an exit plan. Know where you will go and how you will react if confronted. And the third step is to stay together. Never separate, and never let fear guide your movements." May and Lin listened intently, realizing that each piece of advice made them feel stronger. For the first time, they saw a way to act rather than just react. Their minds began to focus, their panic slowing as they imagined the steps Mr. Zhang had described. The girls practiced his advice in the safety of the inn. They walked with purpose across the small room, lifting their heads and taking measured steps. They practiced speaking calmly, even when imagining a threat approaching. Mr. Zhang corrected them gently when their voices trembled or their movements were hesitant. "Confidence does not come from absence of fear," he said. "It comes from knowing what to do when fear is present." May and Lin repeated his words silently. Slowly, they felt the panic ease, replaced by a growing sense of preparedness. They realized that courage was not being fearless, it was facing fear with thought and care. They practiced for hours until their movements felt natural and their breathing steadied. After the practice, Mr. Zhang gave them more practical guidance. He suggested keeping small items in their hands, like keys or a phone, as tools to protect themselves if needed. He reminded them to use their voices loudly and clearly, to alert anyone nearby if something felt wrong. He also pointed out areas in the town that were safer, with lights and people around, and areas that were empty and more dangerous. May and Lin absorbed every detail, feeling their minds sharpen. The night no longer felt completely overwhelming. With each instruction, they were taking back some control from the fear that had dominated them earlier. Finally, as the inn remained quiet, Mr. Zhang prepared to leave temporarily. He told them, "I need to ensure the streets are safe. Stay here, but remember what we practiced." You are stronger than you think. The men may be watching, but they rely on fear. Do not give it to them. May and Lin watched him leave with a mixture of relief and anxiety. They knew he had gone into danger to protect them. Their hearts beat quickly, but not with the same panic as before. They remembered his words and practiced remaining calm while waiting. Each passing minute without incident gave them a little more confidence. For the first time that night, they felt capable, not helpless. May and Lin sat by the window looking at the empty streets. They whispered to each other, discussing what they had learned. I feel braver than before, May said. Lin nodded. Yes, but it's strange. I still feel scared, but I can manage it now. They realized that their fear had not disappeared, but it had been transformed. They could still feel the presence of danger, but now it motivated them to act with care rather than panic. They reviewed Mr. Zhang's instructions silently, planning the steps they would take if the men returned. By turning fear into preparation, they were reclaiming their power. Hours passed, and the night grew colder. The girls had moments where their minds wandered to the shadows outside, imagining the figures that might still be watching. Yet each time, they reminded themselves of Mr. Zhang's words. Fear is natural, but it is not your master. They practiced walking confidently inside the inn, speaking clearly and imagining scenarios where they would face the strangers with control. Each practice strengthened their courage. By staying mindful and deliberate, they were learning an important truth. Survival depended on their mindset as much as their surroundings. By the early morning, the first light began to appear. May and Lin were tired, but their minds were sharper than before. The danger that had seemed overwhelming the night before now felt like a challenge they could meet. They knew the men could still be in the town, but they were no longer helpless. They had learned to turn fear into awareness, panic into action. Mr. Zhang returned as promised, checking on the girls and observing their preparedness. He smiled slightly, satisfied that they had absorbed the lessons. May and Lin exchanged a glance, feeling gratitude and newfound confidence. They were still young and vulnerable, but they had begun to understand the strength that came from calmness, awareness, and careful action. Morning had broken over the quiet town, but May and Lin's nerves were still taut. The soft sunlight cast long shadows across the streets, and the town seemed calm, almost too calm. The girls had spent the night practicing the steps Mr. Zhang had taught them. Walking with purpose, keeping their heads high, speaking clearly if necessary, they had rehearsed it all. But now, facing the real streets again, the fear returned in a new form. They were no longer panicked, they were alert. Every sound, every movement felt meaningful. The distant crowing of a rooster, the clatter of a falling shutter, the slow footsteps of a shopkeeper opening a door, all of it registered sharply in their minds. They could feel eyes on them even when they saw no one. Mr. Zhang had returned just as the sun peeked over the rooftops. He greeted the girls with a calm smile, his presence steady and reassuring. It is time, he said softly. We cannot stay hidden forever. They may still be around, and we must face this carefully. May and Lin nodded, swallowing the lump in their throats. Their hearts were heavy with anticipation. Mr. Zhang guided them toward the streets, explaining each small movement they should make. Stay aware of everything around you, he said. Watch for unusual behavior, listen carefully, move with confidence, do not let fear control you. The girls followed his instructions closely. They had learned that their composure could influence what might happen next. As they stepped outside, the town seemed peaceful, almost ordinary, but the girls knew better. They scanned every corner, every doorway, expecting the figures from the previous night to appear. For several minutes, nothing happened. The calmness of the streets was almost unsettling. May felt her stomach twist. Do you think they are gone? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lin shook her head. No, I don't think so. If they were, we wouldn't feel this tension. The girls moved slowly, deliberately, staying close together. Each step was measured, each movement intentional. Mr. Zhang walked slightly ahead, acting as both guide and shield, his eyes scanning the surroundings with sharp precision. Then, without warning, the two men appeared. They emerged from a narrow alley, their faces partially shadowed, their eyes fixed on May and Lin. The girls froze for a moment, but Mr. Zhang's calm presence steadied them. Remember what we practiced, he whispered. Confidence, awareness, do not panic. May took a deep breath, steadying herself. Lin clenched her fists, repeating the mantra Mr. Zhang had given them, fear does not control me. The strangers stepped closer, their posture deliberate, but May and Lin noticed something unexpected. They hesitated. Mr. Zhang's steady gaze and calm voice seemed to make the men pause as if uncertainty had replaced aggression. Mei and Lin followed Mr. Zhang's lead. When one of the men took a step forward, Mr. Zhang moved slightly, positioning himself so that the girls were behind him but still visible. "We are aware of you," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the empty street. "Do not make any sudden moves." The men stopped, exchanging glances. May felt her heart pounding, but the fear was different now. It was sharp and focused, rather than blind panic. She realized that the control she had gained over her own movements and thoughts gave her a strange kind of power. Every step, every breath mattered. The taller of the two men finally spoke. "Who are you?" His voice was low, questioning, almost cautious. "Mr. Zhang responded calmly. "I am a local resident. These girls are travelers. They are under my protection." Mei and Lin watched the interaction, noticing how Mr. Zhang's calm tone and steady posture influenced the men's behavior. They seemed unsure, hesitant, as if the certainty in his voice made them reconsider their intentions. The girls had never imagined that such composure could have such an effect on those who might intend harm. The men took a slow step back, reassessing the situation. Mei and Lin kept their heads high, their movements deliberate. Mr. Zhang whispered a few instructions under his breath. "Keep your hands visible, speak if needed. Do not make sudden moves." The girls followed his words carefully. When the men took another step forward, Mr. Zhang spoke again, louder this time. "We will not provoke anyone, but we will defend ourselves if necessary. Walk away now before this becomes dangerous for you." The words were calm, yet carried authority. Mei and Lin could feel the tension in the air. The moment felt suspended, as if time had slowed. Every heartbeat, every breath mattered. To their relief, the men stopped moving forward. They looked uncertain, their previous confidence wavering. Mei could hardly believe it. The very men who had terrified them the night before were now hesitating. She realized that Mr. Zhang's calmness, his clarity, and his confidence had shifted the power in the moment. Fear, which had once controlled everything, was now managed. Mei and Lin stood taller, repeating the instructions they had practiced. Lin's voice was steady when she spoke. "We mean no harm," she said clearly. Mei followed, adding, "Please leave us alone." The effect was immediate. The men exchanged glances again, clearly unsure how to proceed. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the taller man signaled to his companion. They began to step back, maintaining their distance but still watching carefully. Mei and Lin felt a wave of relief wash over them, though their hearts continued to race. The situation was not yet over, but they had learned something important. Composure could influence even the most dangerous people. Every small gesture, every calm step, every deliberate word mattered. The girls felt a sense of empowerment they had never imagined possible in such a terrifying situation. As the men finally retreated into the shadows, Mei and Lin let out quiet breaths, realizing how tense their bodies had been. Mr. Zhang smiled slightly, giving them a reassuring nod. "You did well," he said softly. "Fear is natural, but you controlled it. That is how you take away power from those who wish to frighten you." The girls felt a mixture of exhaustion and pride. They had faced the threat directly, following instructions and staying calm under pressure. For the first time, they understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act thoughtfully despite it. The girls and Mr. Zhang moved carefully through the streets, returning to safer, more populated areas of the town. Mei felt her body relax slightly with each step into the light. Lin, too, felt her tension ease, though she remained alert. They spoke quietly about what had just happened, reflecting on the lessons learned. "I never thought we could face them like that," Mei said, her voice still trembling slightly. Lin nodded. "I know, but it worked. Staying calm, moving carefully, it actually made a difference." Mr. Zhang smiled, pleased that the girls were internalizing the lessons. "Awareness and composure are your best tools," he said. "Use them wisely, and you can navigate danger without letting fear take control." By mid-morning, Mei and Lin were safely back at the inn, their hearts still racing but with a sense of accomplishment. They had faced the threat directly, relying on guidance, awareness, and calmness rather than panic. Mr. Zhang remained with them, explaining the importance of staying alert as they prepared for the rest of the day. "The world is not always safe," he said. "But when you act with clarity and confidence, even danger can be managed. Remember this lesson, it may protect you many times in your life." The girls nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. The night and early morning had been terrifying, but they had survived and grown stronger. May and Lin spent the remainder of the morning reviewing the steps they had practiced, walking through the inn and practicing movements and speech. Each repetition made them feel more confident, more in control. The men might still be in the town, but the girls now understood that fear could be managed. They could act with thought and care, making decisions that protected them rather than leaving them at the mercy of others. Mr. Zhang's guidance had been the key, teaching them not only how to survive in that town, but also how to approach challenges with clarity and composure in life. By the afternoon, the girls felt a cautious sense of safety. The threat had not vanished completely, but they had learned that courage and composure could turn terror into manageable situations. May and Lin were exhausted but determined. They had faced the first true encounter with danger, and they had done so successfully. Their trust in Mr. Zhang and in themselves had grown. They were still young, still vulnerable, but they had begun to understand the strength that comes from calmness, awareness, and deliberate action. The lesson was clear. Fear might be present, but it does not have to be controlling. The afternoon sun climbed higher, casting bright light across the town, but May and Lin could not let their guard down. Even though the men had retreated earlier, the girls knew the danger was still real. Shadows seemed to move differently now, every passerby made them tense, and the memory of being followed haunted them. Mr. Zhang stayed close, walking slightly ahead, his eyes scanning every street corner. He had taught them to trust their awareness and instincts, but the practical test was only just beginning. May felt her stomach tighten with a mixture of fear and determination. She could feel Lin's hand brush hers, a silent reminder that they were not alone. The girls moved slowly toward the busier part of town, where shops were opening for business and merchants were setting up stalls. The streets were crowded enough to feel safer, yet still empty enough that someone could hide and watch them without being noticed. May and Lin stayed close to Mr. Zhang, their steps careful and deliberate. They had practiced for hours in the inn, but real danger was unpredictable. Every step was measured, every glance alert. May whispered under her breath, "I hope we don't see them again." Lin shook her head. "If we do, we know what to do." They repeated the lessons Mr. Zhang had taught them silently, strengthening their confidence. It was then that the figures appeared again. May's heart skipped a beat. The two men had returned, and this time they seemed bolder. They stepped out from the shadows of an alley, blocking the path ahead. May and Lin froze, but Mr. Zhang's calm presence steadied them. He did not raise his voice or panic. Instead, he positioned himself slightly in front of the girls, his posture firm and composed. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Move slowly with confidence. Watch their movements." The girls followed his instructions, each step deliberate, each movement calculated. Fear was still present, but it no longer dominated their actions. They had learned to control it, to use it to heighten awareness rather than paralyze themselves. The taller man spoke first. "You again," he said, his voice low and measured. May felt a shiver run through her body. Lin's hands trembled slightly, but they remained by her side, ready to act as instructed. Mr. Zhang did not respond immediately. He assessed the men quietly, noting their posture, their hesitation, and their intentions. "Do you intend to harm them?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The shorter man exchanged a glance with his companion but did not answer. May and Lin realized that Mr. Zhang's confidence was influencing the men once again. They seemed unsure, hesitant, as if the calmness in front of them created uncertainty in their minds. Mr. Zhang took a deliberate step forward, maintaining eye contact with the men. "We do not wish to fight," he said, "but we are prepared to defend ourselves if necessary." His words were calm and steady, yet carried authority. May and Lin noticed the effect immediately. The men's aggression seemed to falter. Their previous confidence wavered. They had expected fear, panic, and hesitation, but instead they faced composure and preparedness. The girls could feel the power shifting in the moment, and their own confidence grew with it. May realized that courage was not just about standing still, it was about projecting control even when danger was real. The girls followed Mr. Zhang's lead. When the men moved slightly forward, Mr. Zhang held up a hand, signaling them to stop. "Do not take another step," he said. May and Lin remained calm, repeating the instructions they had practiced. Lin's voice was steady when she spoke, echoing Mr. Zhang's authority. "Please leave us alone," she said clearly. May added, "We do not want trouble, but we will act if necessary." The words felt strange on their tongues at first, but as they spoke, their fear began to transform into a focused energy. They were no longer victims of the situation. They were participants, actively shaping what would happen next. The men hesitated. Their previous confidence seemed to falter further. They exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to respond. May noticed their tension and realized that composure could influence even those who seemed strongest. Every small gesture, every calm movement mattered. Mr. Zhang stepped slightly closer to the girls, reinforcing their presence and providing subtle guidance. "Remember," he whispered, "confidence is your shield. Awareness is your weapon. Do not let fear guide you." May and Lin nodded, feeling a deep sense of control over their own actions for the first time that day. The situation grew tense. The taller man made a sudden step forward, but Mr. Zhang did not flinch. Instead, he held his ground, his eyes steady, his voice calm. "Step back," he said. The words were simple, but the authority behind them was unmistakable. The men froze, their aggression stalled by the calmness and preparedness they faced. May and Lin could feel their own hearts pounding, but it was a controlled pounding, a rhythm of awareness rather than panic. They had learned to turn fear into focus, and it was working. Slowly, carefully, the men began to retreat. Not running, not in defeat, but hesitant, unsure, and clearly influenced by the composure and confidence of those in front of them. May and Lin exhaled quietly, relief washing over them. The first wave of true danger had passed. Their hearts were still racing, but they felt empowered. They had acted deliberately, followed guidance, and faced fear without letting it control them. The lesson was clear. Fear could be managed, and composure could shift the balance of power. Mr. Zhang guided them further into the town, toward streets with more people and open shops. He explained the importance of staying visible, moving with purpose, and remaining aware at all times. "Danger does not always come at night," he said. "Even in broad daylight, caution and composure are your allies." May and Lin listened carefully. They were exhausted, but each instruction strengthened their sense of preparedness. They walked slowly, deliberately, and every passerby they saw was noted without panic. The lessons of the night and morning had become practical tools in real life. By late afternoon, the girls felt a cautious sense of safety. They knew the men could still be nearby, but they had learned to face danger without letting it dominate their actions. Mr. Zhang remained with them, providing guidance and reassurance. "You have done well," he said. "Confidence, awareness, and composure, these are more powerful than fear or panic. Remember this." May and Lin nodded, their hearts still beating fast, but now with a mixture of relief, pride, and determination. They had faced the threat head-on, survived, and learned lessons that would stay with them for life. As the sun began to set again, the town's streets filled with shadows, but the girls were ready. They had grown stronger through experience. Fear no longer ruled them. They were aware, alert, and prepared to act with control. Mr. Zhang's guidance had taught them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act thoughtfully and deliberately despite it. May and Lin felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for his help, but for the confidence and inner strength they had discovered within themselves. The evening was still tense, but different. The girls walked with purpose, speaking quietly, checking each other's movements, and maintaining awareness of their surroundings. They could see how their actions influenced the people around them. Passers-by gave them space, sensing the confidence in their steps. The men who had threatened them earlier were nowhere in sight, and the girls understood that composure, courage, and awareness had shifted the balance of power in their favor. For the first time, they felt that danger could be faced, not just feared. By nightfall, May and Lin returned to the inn, exhausted but victorious. They had faced the second confrontation and survived. They had acted with deliberate courage, managed fear, and learned the practical importance of composure and awareness. Mr. Zhang stayed with them briefly, offering final advice. "The world may still hold danger," he said softly, "but now you know that fear is not your master. Awareness, composure, and courage, these will guide you. Keep them close." May and Lin nodded, understanding the full weight of his words. They were young, far from home, but they had grown stronger. The night had tested them, and they had passed. Night had fully fallen over the town, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. May and Lin had returned to the inn after their tense encounters earlier in the day. Their legs ached from walking, their bodies felt drained from adrenaline, but their minds were alive with awareness and focus. The fear that had gripped them the night before had transformed into a careful alertness. They were no longer helpless. They had survived danger, and they had learned that courage was something that could be practiced, strengthened, and controlled. Mr. Zhang stayed with them for a final debrief. He sat across from the girls in the small inn room, his calm eyes observing them closely. "Tonight," he said softly, "you have experienced fear, danger, and uncertainty. But you have also learned that fear does not have to control your actions. You have seen that composure, awareness, and courage are powerful tools. Remember this lesson well. It will serve you in life." May and Lin listened carefully, absorbing every word. They felt a deep sense of respect and gratitude. Without him, they might still be trapped in panic, unaware of how to protect themselves. May spoke first, her voice trembling slightly but filled with emotion. "I never thought we could face them like that and survive. I felt so powerless before, but now I feel strong." Lin nodded, her eyes glistening in the soft light of the room. "Yes, it's strange. I was scared, but now I understand how to use that fear. We can act even when danger is near. We don't have to run blindly anymore." Mr. Zhang smiled faintly. "That understanding is the key. Fear is natural, but when managed correctly, it becomes a guide, not a prison." The girls repeated his words silently, letting them sink deeply into their minds. They spent the next hour reflecting on the events of the past day. May described how she had felt when the men first appeared in the morning. The sudden spike of fear, the rush of panic, but then the focus and clarity she had found when following Mr. Zhang's instructions. Lin added details about how stepping confidently and speaking clearly had influenced the men. "I didn't realize that simply moving calmly could make such a difference," she said. "They hesitated because we weren't afraid in the way they expected." Mr. Zhang nodded. "Exactly. Confidence and awareness send a message without aggression. People respond to it more than you might think." After the reflection, Mr. Zhang encouraged the girls to rest. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will leave this town safely. You have learned what you needed to survive here. But remember, every situation is different. Always stay alert, always stay calm, and always act with awareness." May and Lin nodded, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. They had faced real danger, relied on their training and guidance, and survived. The experience had transformed them from frightened travelers into individuals capable of deliberate, thoughtful action under pressure. The girls lay down on their beds, the events of the day replaying in their minds. The encounters with the men, the lessons from Mr. Zhang, the practice in the inn, all of it had strengthened them. May closed her eyes and imagined herself walking confidently through any street, facing any danger with calmness and clarity. Lin did the same, feeling a sense of empowerment she had never felt before. The night was still, and for the first time they felt truly safe in their hearts, even if danger might still exist in the town. Early the next morning, the girls packed their belongings, preparing to leave the town. Mr. Zhang met them outside, smiling gently. "You are ready," he said. "Remember what you have learned. You are stronger than you realize. You will face challenges, but you now know how to face them without panic." May and Lin thanked him, their voices filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done this without you," May said. Lin added, "You taught us more than safety, you taught us courage." Mr. Zhang's eyes shone with quiet pride. "Courage is in every step you take, even when fear is present," he said. The journey out of the town was careful but calm. May and Lin walked with measured steps, heads held high, and eyes alert to everything around them. They had learned to trust their instincts and each other. Every shadow, every passerby, every sound was noted with awareness, but not panic. They had transformed fear into preparedness, uncertainty into strategy. The streets that had seemed threatening days ago now felt manageable because they had control over their actions. They understood that danger could still exist, but it no longer had power over their minds. As they reached the edge of the town, May turned to Lin quietly. "I feel different," she said. Lin smiled, understanding completely. "Yes. We are not the same girls who came here yesterday. We have grown stronger. We can face fear and danger without losing ourselves." The girls exchanged a look, a silent bond formed through shared experience. They knew that what they had learned in this town would stay with them for life. Before leaving completely, they turned back to see Mr. Zhang standing in the distance, watching them go. He gave a small wave, a final gesture of reassurance. May and Lin waved back, hearts full of gratitude and respect. They understood that their survival was not just about avoiding danger. It was about learning how to act wisely, confidently, and deliberately. They had faced real fear, navigated it successfully, and emerged stronger. The road ahead was long, but May and Lynn walked it with new confidence. They were still young, still far from home, but the lessons of the past 2 days had given them skills and courage that would last a lifetime. Every step they took carried the knowledge that fear could be faced, danger could be managed, and composure could be a shield stronger than any wall. They were no longer powerless travelers. They were aware, alert, and capable young women who had learned to survive with courage and clarity. As the town disappeared behind them, May and Lynn reflected quietly on the events that had changed their lives. The threat of harm had been real, but so had the lessons they had learned. The presence of Mr. Zhang, his calm guidance, and their own deliberate actions had turned terror into empowerment. They realized that courage was not about avoiding fear, but about moving through it with awareness, confidence, and control. Every step of their journey had been a test, and they had passed. By the time they reached the safety of the main road leading out of the region, the sun was rising, painting the sky with soft colors. May and Lynn walked side by side, stronger and wiser than when they had entered the town. They had survived a life-threatening experience, learned the power of calm composure, and discovered that fear could be managed with awareness and confidence. The lesson was clear. No matter where life took them, they now carried a new strength inside themselves. May spoke softly, almost to herself. "We will never forget this." Lynn nodded, echoing the sentiment. "No, and we will use what we learned wherever we go. We are ready for anything." Their hearts were still alive with the memory of fear, but it no longer controlled them. It was a teacher now, guiding them to act with clarity and courage. Together, they walked forward, leaving the town behind, but carrying the lessons and strength they had gained. By the time they reached the next safe village, May and Lynn had not only survived danger, they had grown. They had faced real fear, applied practical guidance, and discovered inner courage. The journey that had begun in panic and uncertainty had ended with empowerment and reflection. The girls were no longer the same. They had transformed through experience, learning that even in the most threatening situations, awareness, composure, and courage could guide them safely forward.